The WAV file? Yeah. Welcome to Uptown Radio. It's Thursday, April 11th. I'm your host, Claire Davenport.
And I'm Pascal Hogue. Today, our reporters dive into New York City's past, like Staten Island's oldest bar, which is preparing to close.
It's the end of an era for me, Might be the end of my life, who knows?
And a reckoning over the city's colonial roots, on display as part of a new exhibit at the New York Historical Society.
The atrocities committed against Lenape people and other peoples must be the focus.
But we'll also look towards the future of bail reform. Some advocates say the way the media covers crime influences the debate.
Those kind of media accounts do make the public nervous when it comes to bail reform.
And later on, participatory budgeting and fans of the late Flaco the Owl commemorate his passing with tattoos.
All that and more. But first, the news.
And much more. Stay with us. News headlines are next.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The leaders of the United States, Japan, and the Philippines meet this hour about fortifying their alliance against a common threat, China. They're expected to address the Chinese government's military expansion, territorial disputes, and expanding economic influence. From the South Korean capital, NPR's Anthony Kuhn is covering the White House talks.
President Biden and Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida are expected to show support for President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and the Philippines in its face-off with China in the South China Sea. In recent months, Chinese Coast Guard ships have obstructed and rammed Philippine boats and hit them with water cannon. This is the first summit of the three nations. The U.S. hopes to construct a lattice or network of bilateral and multilateral agreements among Asian nations to help maintain its regional influence while curbing China's. Japan and the Philippines are also upgrading their own bilateral ties and are expected to sign an agreement this year giving their armed forces access to each other's territories. Anthony Kuhn, NPR News, Seoul.
O.J. Simpson has died. His family posted a message on the social media platform X that Simpson passed away yesterday of cancer. He was 76. The former NFL star and broadcaster was one of the most celebrated sports figures of his time, elected to both the College and Pro Football Halls of Fame.
I'll never let you guys down, man. I'll live up to the honor of being in this hall and being on your team.
But his fame was overshadowed by what came to be known as the trial of the century. In 1994, Simpson was accused of killing his ex-wife, Nicole Brown, and her friend Ronald Goldman. His criminal trial the following year highlighted issues surrounding domestic violence, celebrity, police corruption, and race. Many black Americans applauded when Simpson was acquitted, and many white Americans were stunned. A civil jury later found him liable for both killings. United Nations aid workers say they came under fire while waiting to cross through an Israeli checkpoint in central Gaza this week. NPR's Carrie Kahn has more.
UNICEF spokeswoman Tessa Ingram says she was riding in a 3-vehicle caravan on Tuesday that was struck by gunfire coming from the direction of an Israeli checkpoint.
This is not something that should happen at any point to a UN convoy, but let alone one that's on a coordinated mission at a designated holding point where we were asked and authorized to wait.
She says none of the aid workers were injured, but workers continue to face dangers despite assurances of improved safety by Israel after 7 World Center kitchen employees were killed by an Israeli airstrike. Israel says they were mistakenly targeted. UNICEF says Israeli military have not responded to its inquiries. Military officials did not immediately respond to an NPR request. Carrie Kahn, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
The Dow is up slightly at 38,459. You're listening to NPR News.
And it's on WNYC in New York. I'm Sean Carlson, 59 degrees at 4:04. New York City Councilmember Lincoln Ressler wants to better connect homeless people and those struggling with mental health or substance abuse issues with supportive housing. The city has more than 40,000 of these kinds of units, which let residents pay 30% of their income toward rent and connects them with services like job training, health resources, or counseling. Ressler says that's why he introduced...
In New York, I'm Desiree Nikfarjam. Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz has accused a city buildings inspector of soliciting bribes to make property complaints go away. Inspector Zabihullah Ibrahimi has pleaded not guilty to charges of bribery and official misconduct. The city has introduced 3 new plans to combat the threat of fires due to faulty e-bike batteries. The FDNY says there have been 48 fires, which have resulted in 29 injuries and 1 death. The 3 plans include public charging stations, getting rid of dangerous batteries, and voluntary trade-ins. In Newark, police are going to start enforcing a curfew for teens under 18. The curfew requires minors to be within 100 yards of their homes between the hours of 11 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. The city has had some type of curfew for decades, but says it's enforcing it now to combat a spike in crime. Amir Washington of Newark's Boys and Girls Club told Fox News 5 that the curfew could help stop crime and gang activity.
Obviously, there's participation in gangs and criminal activities for some young people. So I think it's a good thing, quite frankly, and safety is important to us too.
In sports, the Knicks are playing the Celtics in Boston tonight. The Islanders are hosting the Montreal Canadiens, and the Rangers face the Philadelphia Flyers. There's more rain in this forecast this evening and overnight. A coastal flood advisory is in effect. 1 to 2 feet of water could flood vulnerable areas near the waterfront and shorelines. Tomorrow, a high of 64 degrees and an 80% chance of rain. I'm Desiree Nikfarjam.
And O.J. Simpson died yesterday. Some of our accepted students for next year's Columbia Journalism School class, Stephanie Rodriguez, Michaela Herbst, and Perry Yaniv, provide the latest scoop.
O.J. Simpson has died at the age of 76. His family announced he died yesterday in Las Vegas, citing a long battle with cancer. Simpson was a football player and movie star. His lucrative career was eclipsed by the infamous murder trial of his ex-wife in 1994 that forever changed his legacy and further cemented racial divisions in the U.S. Simpson rose to prominence in 1968 when he was awarded a Heisman Trophy while at USC and was MVP for the NFL in 1973. He was the running back for the Buffalo Bills for 11 seasons. He was nicknamed the Juice for his energetic runs and blocking capabilities. Simpson solidified his celebrity status by acting in 1970s action films and in the 1980s and 1990s in comedies like the Naked Gun series, as well as commercials for the Hertz car rental company. Simpson's life took a turn when he was deemed a prime suspect in the murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and their friend Ronald Goldman. The O.J. Simpson trial holds the record for the most watched murder trial in American history. He was acquitted in 1995. His legal troubles continued into the early 2000s. He spent 9 years in prison after being found guilty for armed robbery, among other charges. He was released on parole in 2017. In 2019, Simpson opened up an account on the X platform, Twitter, and posted a video saying he would use the account to, quote, set the record straight about conspiracies and rumors, as well as discuss politics and sports.
For years, people have been able to say whatever they want to say about me with no accountability.
Simpson was surrounded by his children and grandchildren.
There's a shortage of volunteer firefighters across New York State, and it's getting worse. Now, the state's Firefighters Association is calling on Albany to help with recruitment.
The association says the over 80,000 people who volunteer respond to over 75% of all emergency calls in the state. Those volunteers save taxpayers a lot, nearly $4 billion per year.
John D'Alessandro is the secretary of the New York's Firefighter Association. He's also an active firefighter in Saratoga County. I asked him why the state is losing so many volunteers.
There's essentially 3 reasons. The first and foremost thing that we hear from people is that they don't have the time. You're trying to not only juggle work, you're taking kids to sporting events and school events. The second reason that we hear is that, look, even if I wanted to do it, I don't know how to do it. I couldn't possibly become a volunteer firefighter. And then the third reason is that's not me. I'm not the person running towards a dangerous scene. I'm the person going the other way. In a career fire department, you have to be, a full-fledged firefighter. You have to be able to jump off that apparatus and go into a burning building if need be and extinguish a fire or search for people. In a volunteer department, we have everything from that position, a full-fledged firefighter, to people that do the books, to people that do fundraising.
So it's a lot more than just going out and fighting fires, essentially.
Absolutely. So in a volunteer department, you don't have to be an emergency responder. You could be a support person far away from an emergency scene, but still doing a necessary and critical job for the fire department.
For volunteer firefighters, do they also live in the firehouse? Is it kind of like in the movies where they go down the pole when someone calls the emergency?
Well, most firehouses these days don't have poles, unfortunately, because government regulations prohibit it. And it kind of varies. I mean, in some volunteer departments, they do what we call duty shifts. So as a volunteer, you would say, look, I'm available on Tuesdays and Thursday nights from 6 p.m. to midnight. In other departments, like my department, we carry pagers and we have software on our cell phones that when a call comes in, we respond from home. The interesting thing about volunteers is we're always on duty. We don't have quote unquote days off. If I choose to do so, I can respond to a call 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And many volunteer departments run more calls than some career departments do.
What should the state Senate be doing to increase volunteer recruitment?
There's a number of pieces of legislation in front of the state legislature right now that we are strongly supporting. Perhaps the most important one is that volunteer firefighters receive a $200 New York State income tax credit that was established in 2006. It still remains at $200 today. So as an incentive to try to attract people to be volunteers, we're supporting legislation to raise that $200 up to $800. The more things we can offer them, the more likely that we'll be able to get at least the minimum number of people that the volunteer departments need.
John D'Alessandro, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
It's been 5 years since New York State made a major change to how bail works.
Since April 2019, most people accused of misdemeanors and lower-level felonies, things like jumping turnstiles, driving under the influence, and prostitution, no longer have to post bail to be released before their court hearings.
Advocates say bail reform fixes a system that disproportionately impacts poor people. Critics maintain it's a threat to public safety.
As Dean Condoleo reports, 5 years later, bail reform is still a lightning rod for debate.
One of the rallying cries 5 years ago for bail reform was the death of Khalif Browder.
Khalif Browder went in at 17 for 3 years for a theft of a backpack, which he was probably innocent of, but even if he wasn't, it was the theft of a backpack.
Cynthia Godso teaches criminal law at Brooklyn Law School. In Khalif Browder's case, he spent 3 years at Rikers Island, mostly in solitary confinement, because he couldn't afford bail.
People were routinely jailed for minor things, whereas like major offenses, people like the Harvey Weinsteins of the world were able to be free because they could pay for it.
And at the crux of bail reform, even relatively small bail amounts can be too much for the city's poorest residents. But every time there's a fatal crime in New York City, critics are quick to blame bail reform. CUNY's Jennifer Ferrone studies the public's perception of crime, and she says the media is partly to blame.
Taking certain stories and making them directly attributable to bail reform, when in fact it was actually unclear. Those kind of media accounts do make the public nervous when it comes to bail reform.
In the 5 years since bail reform passed, the state legislature has twice restored some discretion to judges to require bail for certain crimes. Still, some bail reform critics, like former NYPD detective David Sarney, say the whole system is a mess. He's still frustrated at how it was decided 5 years ago.
There was not one law enforcement agency, not one prosecutor's office that was engaged in the conversation. We never had a seat at the table. This was done by politicians, legal defenders, with nary involvement by professionals who've been dealing with this system for decades.
Sarney argues that without the threat of bail, some people will just keep committing crimes.
They know I'm getting out tomorrow. I'm getting out in 3 hours. And they know it. So what are they doing? They're continuing the crime spree. And all we can do as police department is arrest them and hope we can eventually prosecute one case.
The question of what keeps someone from committing another crime is a big part of what Michael Rempel studies at John Jay College.
We're comparing individuals who were released as a result of the bail reform law to similar individuals, same types of criminal history and charges, who had bail set before the law went into effect in 2019.
And Rempel says the data just doesn't show that most people being released are not just going back out to commit more crimes. He says that's in part because being held in jail before trial is a big detour in their life.
The experience of detention will be harmful because people lose their jobs, lose their housing, experience trauma, and those things will increase recidivism after their release.
Researchers like Rempel are getting more and more data each year about the impact of bail reform. And ultimately, that data might be the only thing that shifts people's perceptions. Dean Condileo, Columbia Radio News.
Before New York, there was New Amsterdam. Dutch ships first arrived in the city's ports 400 years ago, in 1624. There are a number of events over the next 2 years commemorating this moment, most sponsored by the Dutch consulate.
But as Maureen Saint reports, an exhibition at the New York Historical Society is struggling to acknowledge the ways the Dutch displaced the Lenape people.
When you walk into the New York Historical Society, the first exhibit you see features a framed letter. It's the infamous Schagen letter, dated 1626, and it's thought to mark the Dutch purchase of Manhattan from the Lenape people.
It represents this fact that Europeans basically swindled native people out of their land.
That's the exhibit's curator and historian, Russell Shorto. If you know anything about the settling of Manhattan 4 centuries ago, you may know that the Lenape supposedly sold Manhattan to the Dutch for $24.
What we have is this letter that a Dutch official wrote, and he said, "Our people have bought the island Manhattan from the Wilden, the wild people, for the value of 60 guilders.
Shorto says what people get wrong about this story is that the Lenape didn't consider themselves as the owners of the land. Therefore, it wasn't theirs to sell.
It paints the Lenape people as people who really had no consideration or value of land.
Hadrian Kumas is the co-founder of the Lenape Center in Manhattan.
It's very offensive that this letter is used as a means of promoting some kind of transaction which never happened.
Kumas says the Historical Society didn't consult with the Lenape Center in designing the exhibition about the Dutch. If it had, he would have asked for what modern-day Lenape really want, for the Dutch to take accountability.
The atrocities committed against Lenape people and other peoples must be the focus, and there must be the beginning of their own truth-telling, their own means of providing reparations and healing.
And back at the Historical Society, on the second floor, workers are setting up for an event. An artist, Beatrice Glow, is showing off what she thinks those early Dutch ships could look like.
Start with this piece. Here you see a parade float maquette.
Instead of ships, Glow imagines each vessel as a miniature parade float, each one honouring communities enslaved or displaced by colonial rule. One of the miniatures reimagines the seal of New York City with 2 women, one Dutch and one Lenape, crouched around the Tree of Life.
I wanted to imagine that the commemoration, this alternate commemoration, actually came to life.
Glow did extensive research on the native communities in early New York. She describes her work as a collaboration with the indigenous artists. One of the Muncie Lenape elders, Micheline Picaro Mann, even inspired the show's title, When Two Rivers Meet.
And she said in her culture, the most sacred place is where 2 rivers meet. But it's also an invitation to everyone who comes to the exhibition to converge, to listen to each other, and to meet. And at some point, the when is that proposition.
The events this month kick off the start of a 2-year reckoning with early Dutch colonial rule. Maureen Saint, Columbia Radio News.
If you step off the Staten Island ferry and walk around a bit, you never know what you might stumble into. Like a chapter of New York City history coming to a close. Samuel Eli Shepard reports.
It's 3 p.m. on a Saturday, and the regular crowd shuffles in. Leedy's Shore Inn is the oldest bar in Staten Island, and it's nothing fancy. It's down the block from a tire repair store. You should be able to see the Manhattan skyline from the entrance, but a pile of industrial salt from a nearby factory blocks the view. The bar's owner, Larry Leedy, is standing by the door in a blue blazer with a black dress shirt.
I like black and blue, looks good together. But I don't like the black and blues that I got in this business, though. I caught a few. You know what I'm saying?
Leedy's dressed up today because after 17 years in operation, Leedy's Shore Inn is closing this month. And Leedy, 73, is going out with a jam. Leedy walks inside, where he wades his way through a sea of old friends. Music echoes off tin ceilings. Baseball memorabilia line up the walls. Larry's sister, Lene, says this place has history.
This was my father's business, my grandfather's business, and my great-grandfather's business.
Leedy's Shore Inn was founded by German immigrant Jacob Leedy in 1905. It was passed down to his son Lou, who passed it on to his son Charles. Larry and his 7 siblings grew up in the 2 stories of apartments above the bar.
It was quite fun. Baby booming time, you know. If people came home from the service, they had big families. And if we slept 3 or 4 in the bed, we were fine. We were happy.
The bar is a few blocks away from Snug Harbor Gardens, which used to be a hospital and retirement home for merchant seamen. It was established in 1801, and after World War II, the bar became a magnet for retired sailors coming from the harbor.
It was fabulous. And when we were little, we would go there to the harbor and run around, and we knew all the seamen because they were here all day.
Lene says as early as 8 a.m. Larry took over the business from his father in 1992. Today, Leedy's Shore Inn is the oldest bar in New York City to be continuously run by a single family. Except Larry doesn't have any kids, and he's getting older.
But at the same time, my brother has done a wonderful, wonderful job carrying on this iconic place, and he is up in age now, and he deserves to have quality of life. I want to see him at least go to Disney. He's never gone away. It's time.
Larry may travel, but for now he plans to stay in the neighborhood, maybe coach baseball. One thing's for sure, it's hard to let go of a place with so many memories. A scene from A Bronx Tale with Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro filmed here, and Larry even played a bartender. And according to family lore, Madonna stopped by while shooting the music video for Papa Don't Preach. And there have been decades of live performances. Jimmy Mack is tuning up. His band has been performing at Leedy's since the early 2000s.
We played every Friday and Wednesday for the last 21 or 22 years or 23 years, something like that.
Mack is 74. He doesn't think he'll ever get another gig that lasts this long in his lifetime.
It's the end of an era for me, you know. Might be the end of my life, who knows?
Back outside the bar, a longtime patron, Geraldine McHugh, has her arms wrapped around Larry. She says the Leedys are the secret to this bar's longevity.
That's why there's so many people coming out this weekend, because they're supporting Larry and all he's done for the community. He is a legend who's left this beautiful legacy that we appreciate.
But even legends have endings. Samuel Eli Shepard, Columbia Radio News.
The next story is part of our Personal Perspective series. Sometimes we think that those we look up to as gods, and that's how Julia Leo always saw her Italian grandmother. But what happens when your gods turn out not to be perfect?
The gods of ancient Greece feasted on 2 heavenly victuals, ambrosia, their food, and nectar, their drink. I was born and raised in southern Italy, where we have our own version. Our ambrosia is panzerotti, deep-fried half-moons of dough stuffed with all kinds of fillings. Our nectar is Peroni beer, preferably one that's sudata or sweaty. I wholeheartedly believed panzerotti had a divine quality to them, perhaps because the person who's always made them for me, my grandma, Nonna Gianna, was a god in my eyes. I remember almost worshipping her skilled hands as she worked the dough. Once she had what looked like 1,000 circles displayed in front of her, she would place the mozzarella and tomato sauce filling in their center with the precision of a surgeon. Then she would wet her index finger with some water and gently press it along the edge of the dough. And when she folded it into half moons, she inched her face toward the wooden working surface to make sure the two ends matched perfectly. She took particular pride in her sealing technique. It worked like magic, and it never, ever failed. Every time I ate panzerotti, it just tasted like home. Nonna Gianna was just as infallible as her panzerotti. Her short, dark blonde hair was always flawlessly displayed in tight hair roller curls. Her house was spotless, the fancy and sparkly silverware showcased in large glass cabinets. But the most godlike thing about her was her calm and forgiving character. She didn't scream at me if I broke one of her ceramic plates or if I lost my monthly pocket money. As I grew older, my life drifted farther and farther away from southern Italy. First to Rome, and then to New York City. Somewhere along the way, I realized my grandma isn't as infinitely perfect as I once thought. I would love to tell you there was one particular moment when the spell broke, but that wasn't the case. It could have been the time I told her I found a boyfriend in the States, when her face turned pale and she asked with fear in her voice about the color of his skin. Or when I broke the news I would go to graduate school and she told me that if I was going all the way to New York, I might just as well be dead. The thing is, ever since then, I became afraid that recognizing my nonna's imperfection, turning her from God to human, would mean losing my special connection with her. Lately, it's become even harder not to see her as a mere mortal. Her health has been declining, her vision has gotten blurry because of cataracts, she has carpal tunnel, and her hands have gotten numb and clumsy. And now, her panzerotti sealing technique, once infallible, has failed her. When she makes panzerotti now, they don't taste the same. Those once perfect half moons now look more like shapeless blobs, but I'd eat them any day if I could. I've realized I don't need a god. Having the mortal love of my nonna is really all I need. Sometimes I still like to play pretend. I'll sit down at the dining table and she'll bring out a full tray of panzerotti just for me. And right then, it still feels like I'm about to take part in the feast of gods.
Julia Leo has now mastered her grandma's special technique. Welcome back. You're listening to Uptown Radio.
Coming up, people on the Upper West Side are commemorating the recent earthquake with a t-shirt.
And people are flocking to Greenpoint to commemorate the late Flacco the Owl permanently with tattoos.
Wow, current events are causing a total makeover.
And more stories to come. But first, the headlines.
In New York, I'm Desiree Nikvarjam. Vice President Kamala Harris is changing her travel plans tomorrow to visit Arizona. That's after the state's Supreme Court decided to revert to an 1864 law that effectively bans abortion, except when it threatens a mother's life. Abortion has become a key part of the Biden campaign, and Arizona Democrats say the state's decision will cost Republicans votes in November. This afternoon, President Biden met with the leaders of Japan and the Philippines. It's the first time the three leaders have met independently. The countries are sending a strong message to China: stop harassing Philippine ships in the South China Sea. Chinese ships, though ramming into marine vessels, blasting them with water cannons and aiming lasers at their crew, are still falling short of triggering the military defense pact that the United States and the Philippines signed in 1951. The Biden administration is closing the so-called gun show loophole. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is tightening up the definition of what it means to be engaged in the business of selling firearms in an effort to control these sales.
Well, today, my administration is taking action to make sure fewer guns are sold without background checks. This is going to keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers and felons. And my administration is going to continue to do everything we possibly can to save lives.
A Vietnamese billionaire has been sentenced to death. Truong My Lang, a real estate tycoon, has been on trial since March for the financial fraud case, amounting to $12.5 billion, the largest the country has ever seen. And a story of an art crime in reverse. A museum in Munich says that instead of stealing a painting, one of its employees hung one of his own in the museum's walls. While the museum was closed to the public, the employee took a detour from the philanthropic architecture exhibit he was installing and crept into the modern art wing. He drilled 2 small holes in the museum's wall and hung his 45 by 25-inch painting and left. He has been charged with property damage. Meta says it's testing an auto blur feature on Instagram for images that contain nudity. In a blog post, the company wrote that it is an effort to safeguard teens from seeing unwanted nude images on their feeds and to prevent potential scammers from exploiting them. The feature will not be part of other Meta apps like Facebook or Threads. There's more rain in this forecast this evening and overnight. A coastal flood advisory is in effect. 1 to 2 feet of water could flood vulnerable areas near the waterfront and shorelines. Tomorrow, a high of 64 degrees with an 80% chance of rain. From New York, I'm Desiree Nick-Farjum.
The Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program, or CDPAP, has provided almost 500,000 New Yorkers who have severe disabilities with medical assistance for daily activities. But now, after recent incidents of fraud abuse, it's on the chopping block as part of the state budget that lawmakers are negotiating. For people who rely on this program, like mother and daughter Mary and Anastasia Somoza, this change could upend their lives. We're here right now with Mary Somoza. Mary, welcome to the show. And we're here to talk about the New York State budget and some potential cuts to the Medicaid program. Are you able to tell me a bit about what the Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program is?
What we call, and is commonly known as CDPAP, is a Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program. It was initiated about 40 years ago by younger people with disabilities living independently in the community who did not want to have traditional home care. I am, for example, the parent of identical twins, and they're 40 years old. They both have cerebral palsy. They both are wheelchair users. They both are quadriplegic, and yet they have very, very different needs. My daughter Alba, for example, has a feeding tube, and she is nonverbal, and yet she uses technology to communicate. Then Anastasia, for example, who is verbal, graduated from Georgetown University with a degree in political science, with London School of Economics. The original goal was for people who have significant physical disabilities and that need assistance with activities of daily living, meaning getting out of bed, preparing food, having a shower, going to the bathroom. And it was phenomenal because for years, all across the state, at least one parent had to give up their job to stay home And when I tried to get a job, when finally Anastasia, for example, went to university, nobody would hire me. But as with all good things, it was abused, not by the families, but by agencies. They were unregulated and all sorts of forms of abuse, and they were luring people out, seniors out of traditional home care to get CDPAP so these pop-up agencies could provide the services. So obviously it became a nightmare. So the government gets to a point where it completely got out of control, and so the governor decides we've got to do these huge cuts to home care. And typical of government, they sometimes throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Tell me a little bit about where your hopes lie right now. This is Anastasia Somoza, daughter of Mary, also an advocate.
People with disabilities receiving the consumer-directed personal assistance services truly believe that there is a way to reduce the cost of the program in its entirety, so that we can maintain our independence and continuity of care, quality of care, and stay in our communities. And at the same time, there's also a way to work with the state to achieve the necessary goal of bringing down the cost of the program and eliminating the bad actors.
Once again, this was Mary and Anastasia Somoza joining us today. Last Friday, the whole tri-state area experienced the biggest earthquake in 140 years. The exceptional event became a golden opportunity for one type of business: T-shirt printing stores. Pascal Hogue reports.
Just a few hours after the quake, Big Frog custom T-shirts on Broadway already had a shirt that said, "I survived the NYC earthquake." Nadej Alexis and Hajar Race were lining up to buy one.
I'm like, how did y'all print this so quick like that? Like, didn't even wait a day.
You have to support the hustle. It was so smart and ingenious to do this. So I just got 2 custom-made shirts for that.
Kerry Coley is the owner of Big Frog. He was in his store when he felt the earthquake.
And then I went down to check on my employees, and I'm like, did you feel that? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, that's definitely an earthquake. And then I just looked at my store manager a few minutes later, and I said, we really need to create a shirt.
The first shirts were printed and put on sale for $10 less than an hour after the earthquake. Coley expected to sell no more than 10, but
we're probably about 1,000 right now.
That viral phenomenon was replicated in other printing shops across the city. At Wow Custom Tees on West 36th Avenue, owner Myung Park says he sold around 70 I Survived the NYC Earthquake t-shirts.
Everybody was stopping by and like laughing and taking pictures and all. We started to get lots of phone calls, and we sold quite a few shirts.
The t-shirt printing business relies on making a high number of custom pieces, an expensive and time-consuming process. And many printing shop owners say they've struggled to recover since the pandemic. But Park says he's realized his ability to print large quantities of t-shirts very rapidly makes his business perfectly suited for same-day viral moments. He tried it again for Monday's eclipse.
We are probably the best when it comes to printing something like when they need. In some cases, when somebody's life is depending on, we can do like a real production in a half a day.
Because of the success of the earthquake t-shirt, Park says he's now gearing his business towards taking advantage of the next viral opportunity. Whether it's a famous person dying, a freak tornado, or a whale stranded in the harbor, you can be wearing the moment by the end of the day. Pascal Hogue, Columbia Radio News. It's Autism Acceptance Month, and a growing number of nonprofits are shaking up the notion that autistic people can't be leaders. In fact, they say the workplace might benefit from having them around.
As Clara Bowders reports, These leadership programs are by and for autistic people.
One of the leadership programs is called Respectability.
My name is Jimmy Fremgen. I am the manager of state policy here at Respectability. If this is your first time...
This is how most leadership courses start at Respectability, a nonprofit fighting stigmas and increasing opportunities for people with disabilities. Ariel Sims, the president of the nonprofit, has red hair, wears glasses, and uses they them pronouns. And they're autistic. They emphasize the ongoing challenges faced by neurodivergent people in workplaces.
I think that's a really common myth for a lot of types of disability, but especially for folks who are neurodiverse, that we can't be leaders, that we can only be followers, we can only be worker bees, and therefore we don't get the same access and opportunities as our non-disabled counterparts.
Sims and others are determined to change this perception through their leadership programs. But these are different than you'd expect. There's a wide range of how autism presents, so they define leadership broadly.
People with disabilities deciding on what they want their lives to look like and to lead the lives of their choosing. So we develop broad skills to support things like community organizing and activism, as well as advocacy.
Sims says that Respectability's leadership programs are less about getting a corner office and more about an internal sense of being a leader. For instance, recognizing certain skills autistic people have that are useful in the workplace. For Sims, it's their attention to detail.
You know, one of the things that I'm really good at is picking up on typos and things in documents. I can get something that has been reviewed and edited by a lot of people, and I still have a real knack for picking up small details that other people miss.
But certain things are harder for them. They are like an editor, not a news anchor.
If I have to be on camera for a video or something like that, I'll be very transparent that for me, I might need more coaching on what to do with my facial expression to present the right energy for a particular advocacy video. So again, I think we're really different.
This ability to be transparent about areas they're working on has been hard-won. Sims has a law degree from Harvard and has been in the workforce a long time. And neither things keep them from experiencing bias.
When people know I'm autistic, they certainly can treat me differently, and that's true across all kinds of settings.
Fighting the stigma autistic people experience in the workplace is also a goal at the Tony Richard Leadership Academy. Dave Bartek is the CEO. He's not autistic, but he's happy his organization is about to change its name to By, With, and For Autistic Adults.
Because it's exactly who we are. You know, we have autistic people involved in the Launch You program. Jeremy, who's autistic, is helping us on social media. Alex is our featured speaker.
These autistic adults launch small group sessions to talk about a goal they want to pursue. And recognizing that autism is a spectrum disorder, these goals can be as simple or as complex as they want.
An example would be there may be a young woman that wants to just take a different route to work every day, right? So that'll be the goal.
But it's not just the goal that counts. Beth Kimmel is the curriculum director at By, With, and For Autistic Adults. She says they also have a conversation to deal with their anxiety too.
The majority of autistics share that being a neurominority means they have found themselves often, work, school, social, in scenarios that are uncomfortable and anxiety-provoking as they are societal expectations that are not hardwired into them. And their way forward might not resonate with non-autistics.
The new leadership program of By, With, and For Autistic Adults will start at the beginning of May with a new name and new logo. Clara Bowders, Columbia Radio News.
It's Participatory Budget Week. That means New Yorkers have a chance to vote on how city funding is distributed in their own communities, things like parks, playgrounds, and school technology.
Voting is done online or in specific polling sites assigned by each city's district office. Even kids, those as old as 11, can vote.
But as Faima Degia finds, some New Yorkers didn't know they had the option to weigh in on how the government spends their tax dollars. Content warning, this story discusses suicide.
5-year-old Samia Ben and her mom, Sakima Grant, are rushing to school. They are at the intersection of Sedgwick and Dickinson. Grant says she's never heard of participatory budgeting.
Okay. Do you know what today is? Okay, I got you. So today is participatory voting day.
She asked her daughter what she would change in her neighborhood. The school? The park?
What would you change in a neighborhood? What would you change? What would you change? The school, the park, the stores?
The school. What would you change about the school?
The play. 5-year-old Samia says she's changed her playground. A block away, 16-year-old Jair Ricardo is standing in front of DeWitt Clinton High School with a group of friends. They also had no idea they could vote today. But now that they know, they will. Because they say the school's mental health resources are not working the way that they should.
What would you guys add to the ballot?
Good food. Mental health resources.
Why would you like mental health resources?
Because the children in these schools ready to kill themselves. Them children, people don't even notice it. They're not
what Jair wants isn't on the ballot. What is on the ballot for Community Board 12 includes a lot of repairs. For instance, installing a water fountain and fixing a planetarium at other public schools, and a plan to help students with disabilities. Jair is glad kids are finally being included in the voting process. They also say
action upon certain situations until it's a fight or somebody got hurt or something or a child ready to kill themselves or something like that.
Some New Yorkers can't afford transportation, but everyone 11 and older can vote, online or in person. Ballots are available until Sunday. Fahima Degya, Columbia Radio News.
Flacco, the owl who escaped from the Central Park Zoo last year, died in February. In Flacco's 13 months of freedom, his story of survival captivated a lot of people. Since Flacco's death, New Yorkers have come up with all sorts of ways to commemorate the bird.
Some are so devoted to keeping the memory of Flacco alive, they decided to get a reminder of him permanently inked on their skin. Julia Leo attended the hottest and arguably cutest tattoo event of the season.
A long line of people stretches between Freeman Street and Manhattan Avenue despite the rain this morning. The line begins right outside East River Tattoo, a tattoo studio located in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And everybody is here for the same reason.
Flacco the owl.
Flacco?
Flacco.
More specifically, they want to get Flacco permanently inked on their skin. East River Tattoo offers flash tattoo days every once in a while. They're days when customers can pick between a limited selection of pre-made designs and get them tattooed for a discounted price. And people are making all kinds of sacrifices to get inked from the East River tattoo artist, Duke Riley.
You got here early, skipping work.
Yeah, I think for me, I actually really appreciate Duke Riley as an artist, and I think it's like a really unique opportunity to get one of his designs on my body.
Tattoos like this usually cost several hundreds of dollars, but today, Flacco devotees pay $150. There is an option to get a tattoo of Flacco's name, of his face, or of his full figure. When Charlie Cannell looked at the designs available, he had no doubt.
I want the chubby guy. I'm going with the chubby one. He's all puffed out and looks somewhat angry.
His reason for getting the tattoo?
I like owls, and Flacco was cool.
To others, Flacco is not just a cool bird. What many find inspirational about his story is that Flacco, who lived in captivity at the zoo for 12 years, was able to survive on his own for a full year outside of captivity. And although he could have gone back to the zoo because owls have the ability to orient themselves through mental maps, he chose to be on his own.
I think it's a kind of cultural phenomenon because people, they're looking at this story and applying it to their own lives, trying to find ways that they can break free from their own kind of restraints and live the kind of life that they want, even if it means, as was the case for Flacco, having some degree of compromise.
That's Jonathan Hollingsworth. He came to the tattooing event to conduct his own research about Flacco. He's not getting a tattoo today, but he is a firm believer in the power of Flacco's story.
And so Flacco is like both a human symbol but also a New York symbol?
I think he's a universal symbol. We New Yorkers clung on to him as one of our own, but when we lost Flacco, it wasn't just a death that was mourned here in the city, but it was something that was felt around the world. People had been following this story for a year.
Megan Mitchell agrees. She is from Glasgow, Scotland, and she heard about the Flacco-themed event on the radio. She's only visiting New York, but she's no stranger to the story of Flacco.
I think the spirit of Flacco flew across the whole of the world straight to Scotland, and he was such a fighter, and even towards the end of his days, you know, he was just really riddled with it so much, but he just kept going.
And where are you getting Flacco on your body, do you know?
I think I'll get him on my arm so that everyone can see him in the summer.
And so Flacco will get to see another summer. Julia Leo, Columbia Radio News.
Now, another piece from our Personal Perspective series. Each week here at Uptown Radio, we spend hours reporting, writing, and recording sound in some of the smallest studios around.
Our colleague Zoe Yee has a special connection to one of the places we all use. We recommend, to get the full experience of her story, you take a minute and really listen.
I've always been hypersensitive to sounds. From music to singing, from radio to podcasts, from theaters to ASMR. And languages. I speak 5 languages. When you're in a journalism school, it becomes tricky. It's a gift because it makes you talented at audio production, and a curse because when something resonates so much, it's hard to devote to other things. Like writing and reporting. Essential to be a journalist. 6 months into Columbia Journalism School, he had yet to write or produce a single news story. Until the first one, for my audio class. We produce a live radio show every Thursday. Miraculously, with a lot of support, my piece made it on air that day. The moment I submitted that piece, I knew where I needed to go. The Whisper Booth. It's a tiny black recording studio, about the size of a telephone booth. The walls are covered with sound-absorbent sponges. Inside, there's space for just one person. That day, as soon as our show ended, I rushed towards the Whisper Booth. I peeked inside. No one was in it. I opened the door, stepped in, turned around and closed the door as fast as I could. Like a cat jumping into a paper bag. I put the headphones on and pulled the microphone close. As close as it's almost touching my lips. Then I closed my eyes and sank into that chair. I can hear my breath, the slight, gentle sound fading in and out. Almost imperceptible, like a feather swirling in the wind. I can hear my heartbeat, steady, slow, heavy. More subtle than I imagined, like a balloon clinging to the ground. I stay still and listen. Each sound lines up as if in an audio editing session. I mix the tracks in my head, solo or mute some, adjust the volumes until they become a symphony. All the beautiful, subtle sounds of emptiness, and yet the most solid proof of one's existence. In that moment of almost absolute quietness, I feel alive.
When Zoe Yee is not spending calming time in the Whisper Booth, She can be found composting her own music or playing around with microphones.
For a longer version of Zoe's tribute to the Whisper Booth, check out our website, uptownradio.org.
That's it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Cecilia Blotto. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Christina Mikaya, and shaping up the edition was senior editor Dean Condoleo with the help of assistant editor Samuel Eli Shepard and assistant producer Maureen Saint.
In the studio today, the director was Dominic Hall Thomas, Zoe Yee was in charge of Soundbite. In control of webcasting and social media was Desiree Nickfarjam, and working the board was Clara Bowders.
Desiree Nickfarjam also delivered our 2 newscasts, with copy from incoming students Stephanie Rodriguez, Michaela Herbst, and voice by Perry Yaniv.
Our day reporters, Fahima Degia and Julia Leo, brought you the latest on the ground in New York. Today's commentaries were also brought to you by Zoe Yee and Julia Leo.
Our instructors Sally Herships, Carrie Donahue, and Priscilla Ellaby advise our staff. And we're your hosts. I'm Pascal Hogue.
And I'm Claire Davenport. Uptown Radio is live on Thursdays at 4, but you can always find us at uptownradio.org. Until next time, and from all of us here in the studio, thanks for listening.